everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and today on the show we have Alan Steinberg. Alan is one of the founders of Clayworks, which offers studio space classes and a showroom right here in Brattleboro, Vermont. He also, in 2003, he and a group of members of Clayworks started Empty Bowls, which is now somewhat of an institution here in Brattleboro. It's in its 15th year, and it's an annual fundraiser for the food shelf at Groundworks Collaborative. Alan, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, we're glad you're here too. And this is a timely time to have you on. It kind of worked out really well because October seems to be the month for pottery here in Brattleboro.
It is.
We have, first of all, we have two things going on. One is Empty Bowls, which we're going to be talking about, which happens on October 6th. We're also going to be talking about the 35th anniversary of Clayworks,
Right.
which is something that you began 35 years ago. So let's give you let's throw out a few questions. One is, when did you first dig your hands into a lump of clay?
I was a senior in college, working for the summer at a summer camp, and took a group of campers to visit Gertrude Stosiak at the Berkshire Pottery and watched her throw on the wheel. And then I had to go back to the camp arts and crafts shed and work on that excuse for a wheel that they had there, and I got hooked. So I already knew that I didn't want to do what I'd been majoring in with my life, so I took a pottery class at college and skipped a lot of classes, you know, with a whole bunch of other people who would stay up all night in the studio at the school, despite the fact it was locked and we weren't supposed to be there.
Right.
I was hooked.
Yeah, it was the 60s, so you could do things like that,
Do that.
right?
That's right.
What was your major before that?
I was majoring in music and minoring in education.
Okay.
And then after I graduated, I did get myself a job as a public school teacher in New York City. But afternoons and weekends and an occasional sick day, I was at the Brooklyn Museum Art School on the wheel.
Oh, really? So you started.
I was hooked.
Yeah, you were hooked. And you, how'd you end up in Brattleboro?
Not directly. After a few years in New York, I just decided it was time to move on a childhood fantasy and live in the country, and I started looking for a place to live. And I moved to the Berkshires, which was weird. Now that's near where that summer camp had been.
Right.
And my first wife and I bought a house there, and I was teaching in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and making pots in the basement of my home, putting them in the car wet, and driving them to Stockbridge, about 15 miles away, where a group of us had built a kiln together in the basement of somebody else's home. So that was my first collective experience.
As you're talking, I'm realizing that was a collective experience, which you did when you came to Brattleboro and formed Clayworks.
Right. There was an interim step. I dropped out of that collective when I built my own gas kiln at home. And it was built to be either gas or wood because Berkshire Gas Company wasn't promising to deliver gas. But it wound up being a gas kiln. And that gas kiln went into storage in my brother's barn when I left the Berkshires and moved to Vermont in '81. And in '82, there was a sign on a bulletin board, anybody interested in a collective pottery studio, come to a meeting. And about 25 of us met repeatedly for a year, talked about this and that, went to the Cambridge, Boston area to look at some well-established studios, to look at how they organize themselves. And then I remember a meeting, it was about 25 of us, and one of the people who'd been coming says, you know, this is going to be like being married. And somebody else said, it's time. Next meeting, bring your checkbook. And there were 8 of us at the next meeting. And those 8 people started the Clayworks. We began kicking real estate tires.
Yeah.
And there's a long list of places that we tried out. I'm not going to take your time. Each one of them is a story, but we wound up in the place we are now. And by April of in '83, we had brought my kiln up from the Berkshires, and we were starting to build it. We were setting up shelves in the studio, and we were up and going.
So you're still in the same place, which is now behind Friends of the Sun.
Underneath them.
Underneath it, yeah, underneath and behind Friends of the Sun.
Same location.
Yep. What was at Friends of the Sun then?
Well, Friends of the Sun was essentially what it is now. Wood stoves,
Yeah, right.
and other items associated with it. There were several other businesses in the building, specialized sports.
That's right. That's right. The
which
bike
has
shop.
moved. And up on the top floor, there was originally a couple of small businesses. There was somebody doing stained glass, and they left. And then there was the River Gallery School. Was up on the top floor.
Oh, I don't
in
remember
a unheated space with no sink, no bathroom. Rick would carry a bucket down and fill his bucket at our sink and carry it up 2 flights of stairs. God help him.
That's a good story. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So yes, what we've been through, and what
And
we've
look where
done.
the gallery school is now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's incredible that you're still in that same space and
Yeah.
still attracting a lot of people. You have very healthy workshops and classes.
We do.
Yeah,
Classes tend to be full without any advertising.
that's impressive. I'm interested in asking you about. I've done just a very little bit of clay, but I know that so much of what's attractive, I think, to people and what I appreciated is that you're right in there. You know, you've got your hands in the medium and you are fashioning it and shaping it. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like?
Well, Paula Barrington, who's a now deceased teacher of mine, used to talk about there's one place in the body that has more sense receptors per square inch than any others. And sometimes he said 90,000, sometimes he said 50,000. Whichever it was, it's your fingertips. Okay? So when you're working with a material that is basically the earth, reconstituted and made into a condition where it's soft now, not rock hard, you're working with very basic materials, the same materials that your body is made out of. You know, so what are we working with? Are we working with something that's separate from us, or are we working with something that is really totally connected to us? I'm very much aware of the fact that there's so many areas of our life we engage with the world around us with this part of our consciousness,
Right.
the thinking part of our consciousness. And when you work with your hands, you're working with your intuition, you're working with sensation, you're working with your feelings, you're working with your impulses, because your hands are doing that. And I think that gets people hooked.
And do you see that with your students? Do you see not only the getting hooked part of it, but also how they respond, their response to working with clay, and how that changes?
Well, I have stopped the class a couple of times and taken a little survey. Say, so who's thinking about the fight they had with so-and-so? Who's thinking about the bills that need to get paid? The answer is always the same: nobody. Okay? At that time, the troubles of the world get put away, and we are here doing this. So that's healing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I'm sure a lot of people come to that as well.
And people do come and take a course. Wednesday night I started the fall semester, and there's 11 people in the class, and half of them are repeats and half of them are new, more or less. And one person's been in the class 4 or 5 times now. And several of those people in the class who are no longer simply students but have stepped into the next level of being involved with the Clayworks, they are now renters, which means they've got a key and they can come in 24/7 unless a class is on. So their engagement has gotten even deeper.
Yes.
And when we have a second sale in the spring, they're welcome to sell their work with us. Some of those folks are going to say, hey, I'd like to become a member. And that's a process. That is an open process.
And how many members do you have now?
We have 8 at the moment. A couple of people are about to leave. And there are a few people who've expressed interest in becoming members. There's always a flow.
Yeah.
One of the now ex-members of the Clayworks was the first person to articulate the Clayworks as being an incubator. And I think that's a very viable view in that there's a lot of people out in the community here and even in the broader world, as far away as Boulder, Colorado, and Alaska, who got their start at the Clayworks and then went solo.
A big part of it is the community support that comes with that, you know, doing a collaborative, sharing space, sharing clay, sharing kiln time, and also looking at each other's works, I would think would be a big part of it.
I think a showroom is critical. It's great to have glaze tests on the wall. It's great to have photos and books. It's great to have stuff available on the internet, but you can't pick it up and turn it over and feel it. You got to have the pots there. You got to be able to see how a lid fits in the bases.
Right.
You need to see how a teapot pours and how the handle feels, and you can only do that through the sense of touch. So the showroom is an educational tool, as well as a source of support for the studio as a whole.
Yes, and it is one art form that is both functional. It has the choice of being functional or strictly artistic or sculptural, or there are a lot of differentiations that can be made with pottery. Just going back a little bit to that piece about the therapeutic part of it, and I know that that for you, that's certainly been running right alongside all of the work that you've been doing, and you even went to therapy, into being a therapist, right through that.
Yeah. Well, that was a long developmental process. It didn't.
They all are, boy.
It sure didn't burst on me all in one piece.
Yeah.
In 1973, I discovered Paulus Berenson's book, Finding One's Way with Clay.
Oh, yes.
Which was ostensibly supposed to be about a couple of things that were technical in nature. One was about how to pinch pots, and the other was how to mix color into clay and work with colored clay. But the back of the book were his musings. And one of them in particular, well, there were a lot of them, but one of them in particular struck me. He said that somebody had described what he did as more therapy than art, and that he was really upset with that for a while until he thought about it and he realized the word therapy comes from a Greek root, thera, which means to cure, but not in the sense of cure as in you fix something that's broken, more like in the sense of how grapes cure into wine.
Nice.
Okay, or the yogurt cures, or whatever it is. So it's about growth and self-development.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had to start thinking about what was changing in me as the result of the work. You know, and there's an old phrase, you know, what's being born, the potter or the pot? And I think it's not either or, it's both and. As you work on clay, you're making a form and you're also finding yourself. And I began to find more and more that the work that I did and the work that people did in my classes was very therapeutic. I was lucky enough to be on the staff at the Men's Wisdom Council at Rowe Conference Center in 2001, during a year that I took a year-long sabbatical. And we did these exercises where everybody in the group got blindfolded and we led them through a labyrinth on their bellies, like they were going down into the labyrinth to meet the Minotaur from the old Greek myth. And then we asked them if they're willing to meet the Minotaur. And you know, you crawl on your belly for a while, you're not going to say no. So we stood them up one by one. They looked through a hole in the wall, and facing them through the hole in the wall was a mirror. But painted on the hole in the wall and back was a lot of horns and teeth and fangs. And the clear thing was, the monster we're looking for is not down there in the cavern, it's inside of us. Then we got the clay out and began making our inner monsters. Yeah.
That's a great story.
It was a great story. And some of those monsters, we would need a lot more time for me to finish the story, but I was just nonplussed. And I realized I felt like I had a tiger by the tail.
Yeah. How much power there was in the process.
In the material. To bring out stuff that had been deliberately hidden from the world for years and years.
Yeah. That's very exciting.
It was very powerful. And it changed my life.
As Clayworks is celebrating its 35th anniversary, right ahead of that is the Empty Bowls dinner, which is coming up. And we will be we'll be mentioning all these dates also at the end of the show again, as well as some contact information. But can you talk about empty bowls? Because I think so many people in our community are so aware of it. We see the bowls in the windows. There's a lot of promotion that goes on about it. But I didn't know, for instance, that the backstory to empty bowls is that it started in Michigan.
Right. A couple of high school teachers, don't remember what it was they taught, decided to do something with their students. And they raised a few $100s just within the school. And it began to spread from there. And the reason that it got so widespread was that they were amongst the many fairy godchildren of Paulus Berenson.
Oh.
And he began to spread the word at all the workshops he taught, and that's how I got caught up in it. I went to a workshop with him at Pendle Hill, Quaker Retreat Center outside of Philly.
Yes.
And he shared a story. And the story was about a guy who gets taken on the tour of the, quote, other world. And they go down this long hallway, and the guide opens the door, and he looks inside, and there's a bunch of people sitting around a table that's just piled high with delicious, wonderful smelling food. But they're all starving to death. And the problem, it seems, is that they all have these long spoons that are longer than their arms, and they can't get them around into their mouths. So the guide closes the door and says, "You've just seen hell." "Oh, it's terrible. Can you show me heaven?" Down the hall they go. Open another door. He looks in. It's the same scene. Lots of food, long spoons, longer than their arms, but these folks are happy and satisfied. The difference is, instead of trying to get the spoon around into their mouths, they're feeding each other. And that's the story, and it just got to me.
That's
and that's the story I shared with the Clayworks members, and everybody said, "Yeah, let's do this." So that's what we're doing.
This is 2003, and this had already been pretty established as a community outreach out in Michigan. So you took that idea and you brought it to someone at the drop-in center at that point, right?
Once the Clayworks membership decided we wanted to do it, we approached Melinda Busno, who at the time was the executive director of what was then the drop-in center, and she just said, "Absolutely," and we were off and running.
Each year it's grown a little bit more.
It's getting bigger. We started at St. Michael's School, Catholic school, in their cafeteria. And within 2 years, we realized we needed a bigger spot. And one of the members of the Clayworks, Christy Herbert, was involved with Landmark College, still is. And so she got us that place.
Oh, that's great. So it's a bigger venue.
Bigger venue, and we're still there, and it works really well for us.
And how many people do you bring in? Do you know?
It was between 700 and 800 people.
That's a good amount.
Yeah. And we usually have 1,000 bowls. And so at the end of the event, if we have bowls left over, we pack them up and send them off to another empty bowls dinner.
You do?
Rather than save them for the next year, we can always make more bowls. Why should those bowls sit in a box?
Wow. So all of those bowls that have been created in the community, not just at Clayworks, we should make that clear as well. These are other, can you talk about some of the other places that are making the bowls?
Well, like you said, it's not just the Clayworks. There's a lot of bowls coming out of Naomi Lindenfeld's class at Putney School, and Bonnie Stearns is working with her students, and high schools are working with them. And I'm not even going to go down the whole list. And a lot of professional potters. What we do at the Clayworks annually is we hold a, quote, bowlorama.
That's so great.
You haven't worked with clay? No problem. Come on in. We'll give you the clay. We'll do a demo. We'll hold your hand and instruct you, and you'll make a bowl or 2 or 3 that you get to donate.
That's great.
And, we get anywhere between 70 and 90 bowls per year out of that.
Out of the bowlorama.
Out of the
That's
bowlorama.
And how long a period of time is it? It's not just a one-time.
We do 2, like the dinner itself, we have to do 2 shifts because of the limited size of the studio.
And the kiln, too, right?
Well, the kiln is a different issue. We could talk about that. But, so we have a morning session for 2 hours, then we have an afternoon session.
Same day?
Same day.
That must be one tiring day.
And I had another, it is. And we had another day where the board of the center came in and made bowls too.
That's so great. That's so great. Well, it's so cool to hear you talk about this because the whole idea of Clayworks started as a collaborative community endeavor, and you've just keep expanding that idea, you know, and the idea of all of the bowls that are left over going out to other empty bowls in the country. You ship them out to other places
not all
in the
over
country?
the country, close by.
Close by.
Close by.
Can you talk a little bit, just in terms of the scope of this endeavor? There's a lot of production involved, which we've talked about, but there's also the organizational part of, you've got to pick up these bowls, right, and transport them.
Well, last year and this year I've been on the committee. I haven't been in that role every year. But yes, the bowls need to be made. The bowls we have to keep track of who's making how many bowls so we know whether we have enough. If we don't, there's a panic. The bowls need to be fired in time. There's another possibility of panic there. And then they have to get packed, transported to the venue. They need to be washed in a commercial washing machine so that they are safe to eat out of as far as OSHA is concerned.
Yeah.
And then we need to be setting the table. We've got to get all the food there. Getting the food is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's another whole part of
That's
this.
a whole other part.
Yeah.
On the table are placemats for the bowl, and there's ads in there, and making the contact with the organizations and giving them an opportunity to support it.
Oh, that's
that
great.
Takes work.
So you have sponsors as well.
Yep. Yeah. Somebody was very involved in setting up displays all over town. I did one of them. And there's a group of us who have been sitting in front of the co-op for 3 days now, and we will for 3 days next week to sell tickets and or bowls for people who can't make the dinner. The amount of work is just enormous.
It is. It's huge.
It's not an easy fundraiser compared to, let's say, a raffle.
We're just selling tickets.
Just selling tickets, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very complicated.
But again, you know, you're also getting this kinesthetic piece, you know, that you were talking about of the long spoons, of course, is a metaphor for that. The empty bowl is a metaphor that you could probably talk about a little bit.
One of these days, I'd love to have an opportunity to read a piece that Paulus wrote about how he showed up at an empty bowls dinner and got himself a gig behind the serving counter serving the soup. And, you know, each person would come up and hand him the bowl. And there's a long line of people behind, but he would take the bowl and ask the people what their name is. Pour the soup carefully, hand it back to them with both hands. Really slowed the process down, but also created a sense of connection between server and receiver that blew him away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole, well, I think that you've talked about this before, the whole notion of an empty bowl. You know, you're creating something, but it's holding a space there's nothing there.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the empty bowls dinner, you go home with a bowl that either you've selected or it's selected you, whichever way you want to think about it. And you get to live with it. And you get to eat out of it, and it fills your belly over and over. It also reminds you somebody else's belly is still empty, and there's lots more that can be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's this other level, which is the level of, okay, so you know, this is a bowl. This is one of mine, and I pinch slowly. I'm one of the slowest bowl makers around. And like the Eastern traditions teach is that when I'm pinching the bowl, I'm not thinking about the form. I'm not thinking about its curve or any of that.
Yeah.
I try to be thinking about the space inside that which is going to be left over after the bowl's long smashed. And I think that changes the whole nature of the beast.
Yeah.
Be focused on that.
It sure does.
It's like, I mean, I have a body,
Yeah.
you know, more than my body.
Yes. Yeah.
Bowl is a body, and there's more to it
Yes,
than that.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah.
So at the end of the night,
Yeah.
you've brought in a lot of people, and you've also brought in a lot of donations.
A lot of donations.
And these donations are going straight to Groundworks.
Right. We're up somewhere around $30,000 a year at this point.
Wow. $30,000 a year.
And this is Brattleboro with 12,000 people, more or less.
Yes.
I've donated to the one in Manchester, New Hampshire, that the New Hampshire Potters Guild runs. What is it, 65,000 people in that town? Something, I don't know what it is. I'm just making that number up. But they're very happy that they're able to raise $6,000.
$6,000, yeah.
And what that says to me is I live in one hell of a town.
Exactly. It's a community endeavor once again, and it's getting people aware of it. You know, more and more aware of it. It seems every year. And just going back for a minute to Clayworks and your big anniversary, your 35th anniversary that's coming up, which is definitely something to celebrate.
Yep. If you go and walk past Key Bank, we've got a display in the window, and it's kind of sectionalized into three things. In the middle is one of the empty bowls displayed. If you look to your left, you'll see some raffle items and some ticket items, because at our 35th anniversary celebration, we're going to have a raffle. And that raffle is to raise money for what we hope will be the Brattleboro Clayworks' first ever scholarship program for students in need.
Great. That's good. And that would be open to all students in the
community. That would be open to all students. The third section of it is a bunch of teeny tiny houses. I mean, Brattleboro is now known for its Tiny House Festival. In the last couple of semesters in my hand building class, amongst the things that have emerged in great numbers have been houses. So we have a little tiny house festival up in the window. And it's very possible that that's going to be the basis for a display at 118 Elliott Street during our anniversary celebration that will become interactive. People will be invited to come in, and we'll have these houses not just as a little tables display, but we'll create a village.
Excellent.
And we're going to invite people to add to the village and create the village we want to have.
That's great. That's a great idea. That's brilliant. It's wonderful.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's not the first time we've done that. In 2004, the Vermont Leadership Institute at the Snelling Center of UVM came to Brattleboro and did a half-day workshop with me at the River Garden. And then we took all the work that we created as a group and we put it on a pedestal outside in the backyard there. And we left it there for a month, where it got rained on and began to dissolve. But we also left a bucket of clay and an invitation for people to add on, and people took clay out of the bucket and added on. They put candles and photos of loved ones and all kinds of stuff.
That's very cool.
And then I had to take it down. But you know,
that's the kind of thing that should be videoed. That I mean, that's you know, that's such.
We might need time-lapse photography to make it
Yeah,
work.
you might. Although you know, the whole idea of making a ball, it's time, and you're not thinking about time, and this is such a big part of our community, and it's become such a big part of our community, and more people are participating each year, which means that Groundworks Collaborative, as well as getting stronger, you know, in terms of support, and so something like this, where again, going back to clay as therapy and working with your hands and giving to the community as well. It kind of all goes together in a nice way and a beautiful way. That's the other thing. You get beautiful, beautiful products.
You do.
As well. Thank you, Alan.
My pleasure.
This was lovely.
I think you too.
Yes, and I welcome everybody in the audience to check in. Clayworks has a website, and Groundworks has a website, and Empty Bowls does as well. And the dates to remember: October 27th for Clayworks, 5:30 to 8 at 118 Elliott, and Empty Bowls is coming up Saturday, October 6th, so that's really soon. 2 seatings, 5 and 6:30 at Landmark College. So thank you for joining us today. We're happy to have you. We're really glad to have Alan on the show. And we will see you next week for the next episode of Here We Are.